Welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast, where today's brightest minds in the medical device industry go to get their most useful and actionable insider knowledge direct from some of the world's leading medical device experts and companies.
Number 200. Wow, it's just hard to think about and hard to believe that 200 episodes ago, all those years ago, we started the Global Medical Device Podcast. Thank all of you for being listeners and following along through this journey. Just the whole Greenlight experience has been fantastic. The fact that we've developed the world's best medical device success platform to help medical device companies design safer, more effective products that are going to impact the quality of life in a good way is in and of itself freaking amazing. And the fact that I get to do and host the Global Medical Device Podcast, so much fun. Don't tell anybody that I'm working when I do these, but I do enjoy the opportunity to connect with so many awesome people in our industry on so many important, impactful topics. And I've just been blessed to be able to do this for all these years. So thank you again so much. I'm so appreciative, so grateful. On this episode of the Global Medical Device Podcast, I get to talk to a friend of mine, a friendship, frankly, that emerged as part of this Greenlight journey. Someone who thinks about medical device product development and working with startups in a way that very much aligns with my own philosophy and my own approach. And we, have a great time riffing and collaborating off of each other. That guest is Devin Campbell with Prodct, Prodct. And in this episode, he and I talk a little bit more in depth about Waterfall versus Agile with respect to your product development approach and process and methodology. So enjoy this episode of the Global Medical Device Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast, powered by Greenlight Guru. This is your host and founder at Greenlight Guru, Jon Speer. Joining me today is Devin Campbell. Devin is the founder and CEO at Prodct, Prodct. Devin, welcome.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Devin, special surprise for the listener. Oh yeah, by the way, we're on video now, so some folks maybe haven't picked that up, but we incorporated video recently on the Global Medical Device Podcast. Don't worry if you're listening to us and taking a stroll through the neighborhood, you can still check it out on audio, but it is on YouTube. We do have video incorporated into that as well. But Devin, special episode today. This is number 200. Can you believe it? I know, it's crazy.
Yay.
I know you and I have had quite a few thrilling conversations on the Global Medical Device Podcast in the past, as well as just, things that we didn't record. But, a lot of great guests over the years, a lot of great topics of conversation. Do you remember the first time that we met in person?
Yes. Yeah, you were doing a True Quality Roadshow in Boston, and I was on your panel.
Yeah, I mean, it's like...
And then we went out for dinner afterwards, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, man, I felt like I just met a kindred spirit, like somebody that I could just riff off of, and, like we have completely different upbringings. Well, not completely, but enough different upbringing in the industry, but at the same time is like, philosophically and just the way we think about things was pretty similar. And I really have appreciated bouncing things off of you over the years. So thank you for being a collaborator. Thank you for being a friend and so many different opportunities and guests to consider for number 200. But, who better than Devin Campbell with Prodct?
I'm happy to be here.
And I thought, since this is such a special episode, and I know how passionate you are about medical device product development and working with startups, I share that similar passions. I thought we could dive into this topic that's still very confusing for people on medical device product development. And specifically, I thought we could sort of unpack some myths and maybe bust a few myths about Waterfall and Agile methodology with respect to product development. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's fun. It'll be it'll be a slight deviation, from our normal conversations where we're focusing on, more specifically on culture of quality and implementation of quality, primarily with emerging entrepreneurs and earlier startups kind of dipping their toes in this space and kind of looking at it with timid eyes. And we thought, let's not focus just on quality. Let's look at more of because we're both product development nerds in the medical device space. I mean, that's what you and I do.
Yep.
And we thought, let's step back a little bit and look at the more holistic picture of which quality is a piece of. But obviously, we won't be able to divorce ourselves from quality within the conversation, but we'll try to look at the bigger picture.
Yeah. So I actually had an opportunity recently to be a guest on a couple other podcasts. One was Project MedTech from Dwayne Mancini, and then another was the Easy Medical Device podcast with Munir El Azouzi. And I think on both of those, I talked a little bit about product development because, I've been in this space for going on 23 years. And I think there's a lot of confusion.
Me as well, yeah.
And I think the big confusion about medical device product development is exacerbated by the infamous waterfall diagram that's published in the FDA guidance. And I think that there it is. That's it. I think that creates a lot of confusion, especially for startups who maybe are quick and nimble and want to be more agile in their approach and methodology. I think it's especially confusing for software as med device companies. They're like, those regulations, they're antiquated, they're out of date, and that sort of thing. But there's this perception that thou shalt do waterfall if you are a medical device company. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, it's not in 820 itself, right? It's written into the guidance documents where that picture shows up, the picture that shows the waterfall approach. If for listeners, if you pull up the guidance documents for 820, and it's only just a few pages into the overall document where it talks about application design controls and shows you that figure that moves from user needs all the way down to the medical device. And a lot of people see that and they see the picture resonates and stays with them without necessarily reading through all of the rest of the guidance document. And they walk away with this incorrect impression that, well, the FDA says we have to do this and therefore we shall do this, right? They've given us a model. This is the way we have to do it. It doesn't say that. I mean, if you read it, it tells you in the guidance document that this is an illustration of one way to do it. And it's kind of a culmination of best practices at the time, which was 1997. 1997. So about the same time I was getting into the medical device field. And so people they see this waterfall approach and they just use it.
Yeah.
Kind of blindly almost, and it's what has been in the industry and it's what people use. And it's, you bounce around from company to company. Everyone basically has like a stage gated or a phase gated kind of waterfall approach for product development. And you just kind of walk away as you move around a bit to say, well, this is industry norm, right? This is just how we do things, and don't necessarily think to challenge it. And you can do all the research you want online looking at medical device product development processes. And most of the time you're going to find versions of that picture, right? In documents that companies put out to say, this is how you do it. You're going to find deviations of that picture, and you don't see a lot saying there are other ways to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I've always looked at, well, a couple things. So I remember, sort of my formative years in medical device product development, just coming right out of school, being a product development engineer for a relatively large medical device company. And first and foremost, the term Agile, as far as a product development methodology, didn't exist when I started in the industry. I mean, I think the Agile Manifesto was published like 2000 or something like that, right?
2001.
2001. Yeah. So, FDA design control regulations became, and it went into effect in, I think, 1996. The guidance that you mentioned was 1997. So that's, a few years ahead of time. But I guess when I looked at it, I didn't understand, the whole phase versus agile and that sort of thing. When we did development, I just knew that, first and foremost, I love prototyping, getting hands-on, because, that as an engineer, and that's fun, you get to put things together, you get to do some tests, you get to break things and see how things work. But I was, looking back, I think I was really agile in my approach. Even though we had a procedure, we had a system that was more or less, I'll say waterfall-esque in its intent and design, or maybe a stage gate type of approach. But even with that, I mean, there were things that I was doing as a product development engineer that were, I would label as agile today. Why do you think that became, so ingrained as the conventional wisdom in the industry? Do you think it was just that point where people saw the picture, said, "Hey, that's what FDA wants. I'm not going to read any further, and let's architect a system that way"?
Yeah, I mean, you're given an example and told that there are other ways to do it, but you are given an example. And so it's a very obvious leap to say, well, the FDA gave me this example. They didn't dive into detail on other ways to do it. I'm just going to follow that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a natural consequence of providing a single example.
Yeah. And I remember too, we had hired an outside firm. Their name escapes me for the moment, but there were two gentlemen who were I think they were noted as the fathers of StageGate or something like that. And they weren't unique to med device. So I think this is a challenge that presents itself in numerous industries, not just med device. But we actually hired this company to come in, and they put in, all these stages and these gates and all these sorts of things. And it was presented as, hey, this is a better way for a business to operate, incorporating the governance, and you have to have entrance criteria and exit criteria and that sort of thing. But man, it just in hindsight, it didn't seem very effective. It didn't seem to align with what was important for us as a business.
And it was still a waterfall approach.
It was still a waterfall. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's still waterfall, just with different different buzzwords and different marketing opportunities. So yeah, there was not necessarily though it's a revolutionary type approach, right? But served a lot of good for a lot of people, and helped a lot of companies kind of get some infrastructure established, help them get their arms around how they're going to develop medical devices in a very safe and efficacious manner that will satisfy the needs of patients and of customers and of the FDA and regulators. So, not throwing any shade on any of that. I mean, it was very helpful. But again, you saw kind of at that time the industry really swinging. Everyone's all in on that kind of approach, and you see all the companies starting to do it. And then you started to see the same trend as, after the Agile Manifesto comes out in 2001, and then, specifically for software development, you start seeing huge gains in efficiency and productivity, customer satisfaction for software companies where they're using this approach. And it creates this natural tension, right? Between, like, here's something new, it's shiny and new, and it has all of its own buzzwords and special lingo like Scrum Master and sprints and all these things. Yeah. Right. But you see that it's working, and then so it kind of creates this tension in our industry. Like, how do we start to do that? We want to do that, and so you started to see software development, not just software for as a service type options, or software as a medical device options, but just even software development for larger devices that employ software and firmware. You start seeing those teams start doing it, and then you had this kind of disconnect between the rest of the team, and I'm from more of the in vitro diagnostic world, so I have not just the hardware and software development, but also chemistry and assay development side of things. So you've got hardware, chemistry, assay, consumables. You have all this work happening, and then the quality systems and the internal teams that are governing how we do all that, doing all that the way that they normally do. And then you had the software team kind of over here doing something different. And it created this interesting dynamic of how do we let you do your thing and be fast, and have, what are you going to do, like weekly or biweekly sprints? What does that mean in the context of a larger medical device? And how, we can't make hardware in 2 weeks. Prototyping wasn't as readily accessible as it is now, right? 3D printers weren't everywhere.
Right.
So I don't know, it kind of created this interesting tension. Did you experience that at all in your past?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the word fast, because I think that is my experience is that's also a myth. I think the myth is that Agile product development is faster than Waterfall, which can be true, and I've seen it be false as well. To me, it's less about what methodology that you use and more about, I guess, how you architect those processes and those systems. But yeah, I saw that a lot, where, it's a head scratch. It was a head scratcher at the time. It's like, wait, and working on an electromechanical device is extremely challenging, because you have that hardware component, especially like you said, before 3D printing, getting a printed circuit board, man, that took a long time. I mean, to lay out schematics and you got Gerbers and all these sorts of things, and the lead time to get those, and meanwhile the firmware team is doing a lot of work on some breadboards, maybe or maybe even some simulated printed circuit boards. They could iterate so much faster, and then once the hardware team got the first run of boards and they figure out, okay, well, we need to edit here and modify there. There's all these jumper wires all over the damn thing. And it's like, it's crazy. But, I think that's sort of the drawback of being more hand, like a tangible good, like a printed circuit board or a mechanical product, is that ability to iterate is so much slower. And I think that puts some constraints. But yeah, for sure, I had similar experiences.
So I think that it might be a misconception that it's slower in one versus the other. It's really a matter of trying to define, like, what does good look like, and saying, all right, well, we're not going to develop hard electromechanical hardware in 1 week sprints. Like, the software team can do their stuff really quickly, or maybe even a 2 week sprint. But we can think through, how are we going to deliver, something of value that someone can then test to move us along. Because the whole idea there, right, is don't just like give me a bunch of requirements and lock me up in a room and I just develop something, and then like 3 months later I say, here's the prototype, right? You really need to embrace this idea of continuous change. That's one of the 12 tenets, right, of the original manifesto, is acknowledging and embracing that changing requirements happen, and let's not try to fight it, but instead work with it. And this idea of, what can we do? Maybe I can prototype something, like one piece of it, to get some customer involvement or some user involvement early. If it's a surgical tool, maybe, I don't have the whole thing done, but maybe I could start working on the piece that the surgeon is holding, right? So we can start getting some customer feedback on how does it feel in their hand? What does the weight balance feel like? Things like that. So you can get that feedback and do the constant iteration, which is, Agile's famous for. You see that little line that goes up and then it kind of circles around and goes back forward, and you just keep doing that. You can deploy that kind of thinking as long as you're flexible enough or agile enough in how you approach things, even on the electromechanical side. And I've had success doing that in the past.
Yeah. And I've had it on purely mechanical products. And like I said, I didn't know that I was being agile at the point in time where I was doing it.
Right.
But I was we had machining equipment. Like we had a lathe in our engineering department and an end mill and all these sorts of things, and some bar stock and some, just chunks of plastic. And I would go and machine different components. Now, we weren't going to machine the part in the end, but you can machine things and grab a few parts and pieces and, glue. I did a lot of catheter development in early days, but you can hack some things together to make some crude prototypes, to your point, just to get it in the hands of the end user, not from a procedural standpoint, but, get their feedback. Is this about the right size? Is this the right orientation? And those sorts of things. So I think that's the thing that a lot of mechanical people get hung up on is they backload those types of events until much further along in the development cycle. And then, once you do that, you've already invested a ton of time, a ton of money, a ton of resources, and now changes become expensive, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I recall I don't know what the rule's called, but I remember hearing it, the 110-100 rule. Have you heard of this?
No, tell me.
Okay. So, if you make a change and let's just say, and I'm going to oversimplify a product development process as the beginning, middle, and end. But if you make a change in the beginning, it costs you $1. If you make a change in the middle, it costs you $10. If you make a change at the end, it's going to cost you $100, and so on and so forth. So it's a rule of 10, I think, is what it's called.
Or maybe even 1,000.
Or 1,000, right? So it's to your advantage to iterate, make those changes. To your point, realize that those requirements are very fluid, and use prototyping or different things, different methodologies and approaches to help you refine and fine tune those requirements, and do that early and often.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, it's been done, right? So, I mean, we're talking about kind of in the past, and we're also bemoaning a little bit that the industry still seems very stuck on that waterfall approach, which I appreciate its value and some positive things that it brings to governance and overall product development processes. Agile is highly valuable as well, and that approach and that methodology, starting in software, but you can apply it to a much broader space. But there's lots of people that have been applying it and trying, like I tried it, to bring it into medical devices and the electromechanical side, not just the software side. And there are a number of different approaches out there right now that people can still kind of take a look at, right? There's like SAFe, and there's like large scale Scrum, and SAFe is the scaled Agile framework. There's just a number of different ways that you can take these Scrum ideas that people have tried applying them and said, okay, well, I'm going to, take the manifesto and make it our own in this space. And this is what our company does. And it was working, worked really well. And then, maybe you productize it and it becomes something that you can then go out and market and sell to people. And you have your own new buzzwords and your own new approaches. And, there's a lot of good models that are out there. And I think one key takeaway that I want people listening to us kind of talking through this conversation to at least walk away with one thing, to just know that there is something different than the waterfall approach. And there are lots of hybrid approaches that blend Agile and waterfall very effectively. And there's some good examples of people doing it in, the medical device space. What's important though, whenever like a company is looking at this and saying, especially in my space where I really focus on emerging entrepreneurs and earlier startups, to say, okay, how are we going to do this development? To look at these different models that are out there. Look at what the FDA still has on their guidance document that is, much older now. And, look at these different documents that are out there and these different websites. And, Agile's very, very open source. So there's lots of different ways that you can look at it and people freely share these ideas. But what's important is to acknowledge there are different ways to do it. Read about them, learn about them, maybe bring in some experts that have experience with some of them. But don't just pick one and blindly follow it.
Yeah.
Right. Just to say, okay, this is the approach, and I'm gonna go all in with this methodology, and I'm gonna okay, well, we have to use these terms and we have to do everything. In my experience, when I've seen that happen, it's met with some level of resistance within the team. And I think it's important to understand the culture of the team, the culture of the organization, how much can they take, how different from normal could they, if they have a few people on, a startup company that have been in the industry.
Oh, I lost your audio. You're
There we
making
go.
There we go.
I'm back. So all they know is like one approach. Well, then, those, they might even be on the leadership teams for these startups. So they're going to have a little bit of trouble adopting. So looking at hybrid approaches, but then personalizing them and making them your own, that's really what's important, right? And that's going to be how you will ultimately be able to realize the best hybrid blend of efficiency between the two, and help satisfy all of the key stakeholders in your product development processes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've talked, and I'll go back to that sort of that myth, and especially as it relates to like software as a med device. I think, they're like, well, we're pure agile. We follow the manifesto to the T, and then there's others like, oh, well, FDA is sacrosanct about being waterfall. We follow that to a T. I think that's a mistake. You can't just follow something blindly. I mean, I think it's really important to your point to understand who's on your team, what experiences do they have, but define and architect a system that works for your company, for your resources, for the types of products that you're developing. And my current experience, somewhat related to how we develop software at Greenlight, is I think there's a good blend that's important. I think it is important to have gates, if you will, for certain milestones or events, but in between those, iterate like crazy. Use the agile approach, but there are points where the business needs to make a decision about, is this a go or a no-go? So my current thing, I think it's great to have better, or makes more sense to have a blend of those concepts.
Yeah. So what would you say to people that would push back? Because I've heard this before. They're push back and say, well, there's no way a quality system, forget about the waterfall approach that's in there. They just say, there's no way that works in a 820 environment or in an ISO 13485 environment. There's no way that works in this environment. You document your requirements, you build out your DHF, you connect user needs to product product requirements, you start decomposing those further, and you just march through the process and kind of go through the systems V. It's a natural process, and that's just what you have to do for quality, because you have to be able to tie back and have this test case, this verification or these validation studies, proves out these requirements or user needs. And that's just, you work through it, and several months or years later, you start doing your verification studies to prove all that stuff. What do you say to the folks that say, no, there's no way you can use this kind of thinking in the strict confines of medical device quality systems?
Well, my first reaction is, in my 23 years of doing this, I don't share that experience. I have a different experience that suggests that there is a more flexible way to do this. Right. And I would encourage someone to read that guidance document past the waterfall diagram, where FDA talks about the product development methodologies and approach. And to your point, I think you mentioned this at the beginning, they say this is a way, this is not the only way. I'm certainly paraphrasing here. And
they say, I can give you the exact word because I have it here. The development process depicted in the example is a traditional waterfall model. The design proceeds in a logical sequence of phases or stages. The requirements are developed and the device is designed to meet that. And it goes on to say, but this is an example, right?
Yeah.
This is, the key word there is the example.
Yeah.
Meaning there are others.
And they further on in that document too, it talks about concurrent engineering.
Yep.
Which My interpretation of concurrent engineering is it's agile methodology before the term agile methodology was even coined as a
It's a hot thing.
Yeah. I think there are some absolutes though. I think there is certain order of operation. I think you shouldn't be doing final verification or validation activities without understanding what your user needs and your requirements are.
True.
I think it's hard for you to have final outputs and specifications without knowing what your requirements were.
Right.
So I think there is a certain order of operation that, and I think this is where traceability is so important. And frankly, this is what drove me to conceptualize a better way of design controls and traceability, making it more common practice rather than sort of a thing that some folks did. Let's make this the key thing. If you can show that sort of that chain of custody, that traceability, that flow, then to me, you can break your device into 1,000 different mini projects, if you will, just showing how all of those things are. Like maybe you're just having, to your point earlier about the surgical tool, maybe you just want to figure out the shape and size and the ergonomics of that handle. You're not worried about all the rest of it. Well, then just focus on that and show the flow. And so I can do a verification activity on just that shape and that design. And I may not have even chosen the materials for the rest of it yet. And I think that's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So one thing I would add to that response. So I also don't share the opinion that I suggested. Like, what would you say to the people that say this? Clearly, I was setting us both up. Not only do the regulations not say that you have to do this, right? But if someone says, well, quality systems just won't allow it, the pushback is really, you need to take a good hard look at your quality system. That the documentation that you've written that governs how you do things, it may be the case that someone says, well, for example, I can't process a change that fast, right? So I don't want to like bump a rev on something, and then I have God, Queen, and Country. Everyone has to sign off on this change order before I can do it. And I say, well, implement a new change order or an alternative change order system. Use that as your final change order, but you can do like interim change orders. And we've talked on one of our earlier calls of, I don't know, in the course of the last year or two, about when to start a QMS. And I'm very firm on start as early as you possibly can. And I'm a big proponent of document early, revise often, right? There's nothing wrong with when you go to market, the rev of a component in your system is rev 17. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it actually illustrates that you've done a lot of testing along the way and you've learned from what's going on. You've made improvements instead of just launching your product and everything's at rev 0.
Yeah,
right?
That's the eyebrow raiser, is if that were the case. Like, oh, really? You came to market with one rev of your product? That's a head scratcher. Right. I have two other reactions too. I mean, I've heard for years how engineers hate design controls. And my reaction to that statement is no. If you feel that way, it's probably because your design control and product development system is too cumbersome and onerous.
Right.
And then sort of related to that is a lot of people don't want to issue a change order or make a rev to something because the process that they have for making changes is too cumbersome as well. So if that's how you feel when you're going through design control, product development, change management, and those sorts of things, that it's too burdensome, take a look at your system, take a look at your approach, because it's too rigid. It's just too rigid.
Right. Yeah, it's completely a fallacy that a QMS will not support. Like even a full agile approach, your QMS can absolutely, in a medical device context, can absolutely still support that. Yeah.
Well,
here's interesting. As engineers, and I'm a mechanical engineer, we generally always do rev control on our own, right? You might come up with 3 versions of a model in one day, and you're going to call them, whatever your rubric is, maybe the date .1, .2, .3 or something. But because we know and we appreciate the value of being able to go back and understand which one did we do testing with and whatever. So it shouldn't be the case that you can't have a quality system that allows you to do that in a way that you can kind of take credit for, right?
Well, and I think that's part of the challenge. Most engineers are systematic enough to have that sort of rubric and approach,
right,
but oftentimes it's buried in their own logbook, right? And that's unfortunate because this is potentially institutional company knowledge that will never surface. And but what if it did? What if you could track and manage all of these iterations and play some of those out a little bit? Say, well, I don't know if the .1, the .2, or the .3 has merit, but I need to do more discovery to find out. But if you only pursue, or you only capture that in your logbook, and then you only pursue the one that was the winner through that discovery, what happens post-market? And now you need to update something, and somebody's like, oh, we should change this thing to that other thing. And it was something that was discovered early on in development, but nobody knows it because it's buried.
right.
It's hidden.
Yeah, open and transparent is the best way to do it.
Yeah. Well, any other thoughts or tips or pointers on this exciting topic of product development that you think is important to leave the audience with today?
I mean, just think for yourself, right? Go look at different ways of doing it. Know that there's more than one way. Look at them, talk to experts talk to folks like Jon and I that have done it before in the past and seen it go really well and seen it go poorly, and internalize that information and kind of come up with your own approach. And don't let arbitrary bureaucracy or the specter of QMS hold you back. That it is absolutely not the case. You can't have your cake and eat it too in this situation. You can be full agile, you can be hybrid agile, you can do what you want. Your quality systems, as long as they're flexible enough, can support it. And you can bring products to market with better quality, better delight for your customers and for your users, better patient outcomes, better efficacy, lower costs for development. There's a lot of benefits to kind of opening your eyes and taking a good look and doing some planning before you jump in and attack. Absolutely. And kind of questioning the industry norms.
Absolutely. And, I'll leave it with waterfall can work, agile can work. Mm-hmm. Some other method that you come up with can also work. There is a stigma, but there's no criteria that says thou shalt use this or that. It is really up to you. I think the key thing is to keep in mind is design controls are the outcome of the process. These are the evidence, the proof that demonstrates that your product is safe and effective and meet your indications for use. So this is what a traceability matrix how it serves. This is the intent behind a design history file, and that sort of thing is that demonstration that what you did meets the needs of the end user. What you did is safe. What you did is effective. That's the whole premise behind design controls.
Yeah. Different ways to get to the same destination, but they're all equally valid. Absolutely.
Devin, I kind of wrap things up today. I'm so glad that we had that opportunity to meet in Boston those years ago, and every time we chat, I always wrap up the conversation smiling and laughing, and just we have a good time. So thank you for your friendship over the years, and looking forward to collaborating years ahead as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And of course, I also want to thank you for being the guest, Devin Campbell with Prodct. You can check out more about Prodct. Follow him on LinkedIn. Check out his website, prodct.dev, D-E-V. So check that out. He works with a lot of startup companies, from electromechanical devices to IVD. Just a really great resource to have in your corner. So reach out to Devin and tap into his years of wisdom on medical device product development. And as always, thank you for being listeners and now viewers of the Global Medical Device Podcast. We could not have gotten to number 200 and soon beyond without you, the listener. Thank you for keeping us as the #1 podcast in the medical device industry. As always, this is your host and founder at Greenlight Guru, Jon Speer, and we'll talk to you again real soon.